I used my husband's phone to transfer money to the nanny. She texted back thanking him, adding that the baby in her belly was being very good today. I did something that made them turn pale. Dinner had been served a while ago, and the steam from the pot roast had completely dissipated. I stood tucked away in the corner of the kitchen, my hands gripping a worn-out dish towel. From the living room, the steady drone of the television echoed, but it couldn't mask the terrifying silence hovering over the dining table. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, sat there with a stern face, her sharp eyes occasionally darting toward the kitchen where I stood. I knew the storm was coming. For a long time now, every meal in this house was no longer a time for family bonding, but a stage for her to vent her disappointment over my ultimate sin. Where is Lauren? Why isn't she out here to eat? Or does she think she's still some spoiled heiress waiting for an old woman to personally invite her to grace us with her presence? Eleanor's voice rang out, as sharp as a razor. I flinched, hastily wiping my hands on my apron before stepping out, forcing a stiff smile to ease the tension. I'm right here, Mom. I was just organizing the spice rack, so it took a minute. Let's eat. I gently handed her a plate of food with both hands, but she didn't take it immediately. Instead, she stared intently at my thin fingers. Her lips pressed into a tight line, and a long, drawn-out sigh echoed through the quiet house. Dinner began in suffocating silence. The clinking of silverware against porcelain was painfully loud, occasionally interrupted by Eleanor's dry coughs. After a few bites, she slammed her fork down onto the table, her eyes flashing with venom. She looked at my husband, Thomas, who was eating with his head down, and then turned her wrath onto me. Look at this, Thomas. I raised you to be a successful man. And for what? To watch this family line die out? 8 years. 8 years. And not even a whisper of a child. What kind of wife are you? You're a dead end, draining his bank account and bringing nothing but embarrassment to this family. The food in my mouth suddenly tasted like ash, forming a bitter lump in my throat that I couldn't swallow. I knew she was speaking from an old-school, traditional mindset, but my heart still ached as if someone were crushing it. I didn't dare look up. I only felt my tears begin to drop silently onto my plate. Every word she spoke was like a knife to my chest, rubbing salt into a wound that never seemed to heal. Eleanor only grew more aggressive. She dragged up the past, mocking how I had cut ties with my wealthy family to run away with Thomas. She called me a disgrace, a curse upon their household, claiming that since I arrived, the family's luck had stagnated, especially regarding children. Mom, please stop. Children are a blessing from above. Why do you keep blaming Lauren? She's suffering enough. If you love me, you have to have some sympathy for my wife. Thomas finally spoke up, his voice deep and full of resignation. He reached under the table and squeezed my hand tightly, as if trying to transfer his strength to his pitiful wife. Eleanor scoffed, her face twisting in anger. She pointed a finger right at his face, yelling that he was an ungrateful son who forgot his own legacy over a woman. She told me that if I had any self-respect left, I would pack my bags and leave voluntarily before she had to use drastic measures. I had memorized these insults by heart, but why did they still hurt so much? I stood up, my legs trembling, intending to clear the table, but Eleanor violently swatted my hand away, sending the plates crashing to the hardwood floor. The sound of shattering ceramic mirrored my own heart, broken into pieces that could never be glued back together. That night, I lay facing the wall. My choked sobs were suppressed into tiny whimpers so I wouldn't bother Thomas. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. His warmth was the only thing keeping me tethered to this life. He whispered soothing words into my ear, promising he would always be by my side, that children were up to fate, and if we never had them, it was fine. His tenderness in that moment only made me feel more guilty. I felt like an absolute failure of a wife for not being able to give him a complete family. In the dark, I promised myself I would try harder, see every specialist, and take every fertility supplement imaginable to give him a child. Little did I know, that very tenderness was a flawless mask concealing a vicious conspiracy that was slowly coming to light. The next morning, before the first rays of sunlight could pierce through the misty suburban fog, Thomas woke me up. His face was dead serious, yet affectionate. In his hand, he held a piece of paper with a hospital letterhead. His hand was shaking slightly, as if he were hiding something of grave importance. Panicking, I asked, What's wrong? Is it your mom's health? He shook his head and pulled me to sit on the edge of the bed. His eyes were red, like he hadn't slept at all. He unfolded the paper, placed it in my hands, and choked out, "Lauren, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. All this time, I let you take the blame, let my mother torture you, because I was too much of a coward to tell the truth." I stared in shock at the words on the urology report. Primary infertility due to azoospermia, 0 sperm count. My head spun. The room tilted. I couldn't believe my eyes. A healthy, strapping man like Thomas was the one who couldn't have children? The initial shock was quickly replaced by boundless pity for my husband. I hugged him, crying uncontrollably. But this time it was out of love for him, not self-pity. I blamed myself for never considering this possibility, for constantly hating my own body while we both suffered. I didn't want my mother to look down on me, so I planned to take this secret to my grave. But seeing you wither away every day, I can't take it anymore, Thomas said, his voice so painfully sincere that I didn't suspect a thing. He said he would show the paper to his mother so she would stop harassing me, but he feared the shock would make her ill. His sacrifice, willing to take the fall to protect my honor, moved me to tears. I held his hand and fiercely declared that no matter what, I would never leave him. I told him to keep it a secret. I was willing to bear the title of the barren wife, so he could keep his pride intact in front of his family and our neighborhood. Blind love had robbed me of the clarity needed to see the gaping holes in my perfect husband's story. That very day, the atmosphere in the house changed bizarrely. Thomas showed the paper to Eleanor behind closed doors. I only heard her agonizing wails, followed by a prolonged silence. When she walked out of the room, her gaze toward me had lost some of its venom, replaced by a chilling, terrifying coldness. She no longer insulted me openly, but her passive-aggressive neglect and contempt continued in the shadows. Thomas, on the other hand, became even more attentive. Every evening after work, he would bring home my favorite takeout, or expensive imported supplements he claimed his friends got from overseas. He would pour me a glass of water, place the pills in my hand, and make sure I took them right on schedule to nourish my body, just in case a miracle happened. I trusted him implicitly. I swallowed those pills with absolute hope and gratitude. I felt so lucky to have such a forgiving husband. I silently thanked God for bringing him to me, a man who swallowed a man's greatest pride just for my sake. Late at night, when Thomas was asleep, I would look at his face and vow to spend my life repaying his kindness. I even took up freelance interior design projects from home to earn extra money, hoping to ease his financial burden. But sometimes, I caught a fleeting, cold, distant look in his eyes that I couldn't explain, especially when he took long phone calls on the patio. His voice would drop low, sounding secretive. When I asked him about it, he just smiled his gentle smile, claiming it was a corporate crisis, and telling me not to stress my fragile health. I believed him, pushing down the tiny embers of doubt to continue living in the artificial cocoon of happiness he had so painstakingly woven. I had no idea that the medical report was a masterful forgery, and that the supplements I swallowed daily were the rope slowly tightening around my future. One weekend afternoon, Thomas returned home, but not alone. He brought a young woman and a little boy, about 3 years old. The woman looked rugged and exhausted, wearing faded, cheap clothes, her eyes constantly averted in fear. Thomas introduced her as Tara, a girl from a struggling rural town who knew one of his coworkers. Supposedly, her husband had run off with another woman, leaving her destitute, so she had dragged her son to the city looking for work. The boy's name was Leo. He had big, round, dark eyes and a pouty mouth. He was undeniably adorable. From the first glance, the compassion of a woman desperate to be a mother surged within me. Thomas pulled me into our bedroom, his voice pleading as if asking for the world. He said seeing Tara and Leo stranded broke his heart. He suggested we foster Leo. It would bring the joy of a child into our quiet home, and it would ease Eleanor's obsession with a grandson. As for Tara, she could stay as our live-in housekeeper. She would get room and board, stay close to her son, and help me around the house. Lauren, look at how pathetic the boy is. He's innocent. Doing a good deed will bring us good karma. Maybe God will bless us with a miracle of our own, Thomas whispered smoothly, striking my only weaknesses, my empathy and my burning desire for a child. I hesitantly looked out into the living room. Eleanor was holding Leo, her face glowing with a radiant joy I hadn't seen in 8 years. She cooed at him, feeding him cookies. Her eyes sparkled as if he were her own flesh and blood. Tara stood timidly to the side, occasionally shooting Thomas a very loaded, meaningful glance. At the time, I just thought she was silently thanking her savior. Their arrival breathed life into the gloomy house. After some thought, I agreed to Thomas's proposal. I figured another mouth to feed was no big deal, as long as our family was happy and my husband was fulfilled. Since Tara and Leo moved in, my life changed entirely. I no longer had to rush to do chores, as Tara handled everything, but in return, I felt like a ghost in my own home. Eleanor devoted all her time to Leo. She spoiled him rotten, buying him designer clothes and expensive toys. Whenever I tried to hold him, she would find an excuse to push me away or make snide remarks about how a woman with no maternal warmth would ruin the child. It stung, but watching Thomas happily play with the boy, I told myself to be more forgiving. I treated Leo like my own, personally buying his formula and medicine when he got sick, never shying away from any task. Tara was a quiet woman, always appearing diligent and knowing her place. She worked nonstop doing laundry, cleaning, cooking, and Eleanor was highly satisfied. However, I began to notice abnormalities that should have put me on high alert much earlier. Tara understood Thomas's habits flawlessly. She knew exactly what he liked to eat and exactly how he took his coffee without me ever having to instruct her. There were nights I woke up to find the bed empty. Walking to the patio, I would see Thomas whispering with Tara in the dark corner of the yard. When they saw me, they both acted flustered and quickly brushed it off with flimsy coincidences. Once, I walked past Eleanor's room and heard joyous laughter inside. Eleanor was telling Leo, "You have to eat a lot, my sweet boy, so you can grow up and take over your daddy's empire." The word daddy coming from her mouth made me freeze. My heart raced. Daddy? Was she referring to Thomas? But then I calmed myself down, rationalizing that she was just playing with the toddler. Since Thomas fostered him, calling him daddy was normal. My gullibility was truly pathetic. I was so busy tending to this borrowed happiness that I had no idea the people I considered family were weaving a sophisticated web of betrayal to push me into an abyss of humiliation. Lately, the atmosphere in the house had shifted in a strange way. If I weren't so sensitive, I might not have noticed. Eleanor suddenly stopped yelling at me as much. But to make up for it, she and Thomas frequently had long, private conversations in closed rooms. Sometimes when I walked by, the whispering would abruptly stop, leaving only the hum of the ceiling fan and my mother-in-law's scrutinizing glare as I entered. I told myself they were just discussing Thomas's finances or Leo's preschool, the boy who had become the center of our universe. Tara remained the same, diligent and silent as a shadow, but I noticed that whenever Thomas came home from work, her eyes lost their submissive hired help look and sparkled with an indescribable thrill. A woman's intuition told me. An invisible thread was tightly binding these three people together, locking me out. That afternoon, the golden autumn sun stretched across the backyard. I took advantage of Leo's nap time and Eleanor's HOA board meeting to go out to the old oak tree in the back to pick up some fallen branches. This old tree had always been my sanctuary. Its shade soothed my suppressed frustrations. As I bent down, a strange noise from the other side of the privacy fence near the patio made me stop. It was Thomas. His voice was low but anxious, and right after came Eleanor's sharp, decisive tone. "You have to play this smart, Thomas. Don't let her suspect a thing. Leo is your biological son. Sooner or later he needs his rightful status. We can't just let him be known as an adopted foster kid forever." I was paralyzed. A shock of electricity shot through my body, rendering my legs utterly useless. The words biological son echoed in the quiet yard like a thunderclap, shattering every ounce of trust I had for the perfect husband I'd worshipped all these years. I held my breath, pressing my body hard against the rough bark of the oak tree, ignoring the sharp twigs digging painfully into my skin. On the other side of the fence, Thomas sighed, sounding incredibly calculating. "Don't worry, Mom. I've prepared everything. For now, keep Tara here under the guise of a nanny to take care of the boy. Give it a little more time. When Lauren completely trusts us, I'll find a way to legalize the paperwork." Eleanor scoffed, her voice dripping with undisguised contempt for me. "Leo looks exactly like you." especially that nose and those eyes. Anyone looking at him knows he has our family's blood. As for Lauren, just let her be the smokescreen to keep things quiet. She's submissive and easy to control, and she thinks she owes you her life. Because of that fake sterility report, I bet she wouldn't dare breathe a word of complaint. Fake sterility report? My heart felt like it was being crushed by an invisible hand. Hot tears welled up, but I didn't dare let out a sob. Everything from Thomas's tender care, to the agony of infertility, to fostering Leo, it was all a flaw. The man I worshipped, the man who was willing to take the blame for being sterile, was actually a despicable, deceitful monster. He had fathered a child with another woman while sharing my bed. Then he brought both his mistress and his bastard into my home, making me serve them and love them. The most agonizing part was my mother-in-law's complicity. She constantly cursed me for not bearing children, yet secretly helped her son commit adultery to secure a bloodline. I felt so ridiculous, so pathetic, spending years cultivating this fake happiness, even feeling crippling guilt for not giving him a baby. I stood there, frozen, staring at the dry leaves in my hands, realizing how incredibly bitter my life was. The shadows of the late afternoon began to envelop the yard, much like the darkness slowly strangling the future I had dreamed of. That night, I lay next to Thomas, but it felt like I was lying next to a stranger, a venomous snake waiting for the chance to choke me. The warmth from his arm draped over my waist was now terrifyingly cold. As usual, before bed, Thomas considerately poured a glass of warm water and took out 2 pills from the bottle with the imported label he claimed were rare fertility supplements. He looked at me with eyes full of affection, his voice sweet as honey. "Take these, Lauren. They're highly effective, but you have to be consistent for your health to improve. I just want you to get better so our house can have the laughter of our very own child." I stared into those eyes, the eyes that used to be my entire world. Now, all I saw was a grotesque, nauseating fake. I forced a smile, took the glass of water, and pretended to put the pills in my mouth. Instead, I quickly hid them in the palm of my hand under the thin comforter. Waiting until Thomas fell into a deep sleep, his breathing steady, I gently sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed the bottle from the nightstand. My hands shook as I opened the cap. The small, pale, pink, round pills looked entirely harmless. Yet they held a horrific secret I was just beginning to suspect. I remembered Eleanor's words under the oak tree about how Thomas had prepared everything so I couldn't complain. A thought flashed through my mind that made me shudder violently. Were these really supplements, or something else designed to stop me from getting pregnant for 8 years? I quickly slipped a few pills into my pocket, promising myself I would find the ultimate answer tomorrow. The next morning, I used the excuse of running to the farmer's market to visit a large pharmacy downtown, far away where no one knew me. The middle-aged pharmacist inspected the pill closely, then looked at me with a mix of pity and surprise. "How long have you been taking these, ma'am? This is a high-dose oral contraceptive. It's usually prescribed for specific cases needing long-term hormonal suppression." There was a ringing in my ears. The world blurred through my tears. Birth control. For 8 long years, the man I called my husband had methodically fed me birth control, disguised as vitamins. He didn't just betray me with another woman. He sadistically and cowardly robbed me of my right to be a mother. He wanted me to forever be the barren tree, so he had an excuse to bring his illegitimate child home, so his mother had an excuse to humiliate me, and so I would remain obedient and grateful. I walked out of the pharmacy, stumbling down the crowded sidewalk, feeling like a soulless ghost among the busy pedestrians. The pain was too massive. It far exceeded any threshold of endurance I thought I possessed. 8 years of my youth, 8 years of sacrifice and silent suffering, in exchange for a vicious conspiracy orchestrated by the person I loved most. I felt pure hatred. A bone-deep hatred surged within me. But strangely, after the hysterical tears, a terrifying calmness overtook my mind. I didn't want to cry anymore. I didn't want to run home and throw a screaming fit for the neighbors to laugh at. I knew I had to be strong, to be calculating to reclaim my justice. The people who trampled on my trust and dignity would pay a steep price for what they'd done. Sitting alone in a quiet coffee shop, I watched the traffic, her memories of 8 years ago playing like a tragic movie. Back then, I was the beloved daughter of Richard Sterling, a wealthy real estate magnate. I was his princess. My father, a seasoned businessman, had fiercely opposed my marriage. He said Thomas had the face of a liar, that behind his preppy exterior lay unchecked ambition and deceit. But blinded by love, I defied my father, even leaving home with nothing but the clothes on my back, believing love was all I needed. I had been so proud to build this little nest with Thomas. I felt so brave following my heart. Now, looking at the result, I realized how incredibly stupid I was, and I felt profound pity for my father, who had aged prematurely worrying about his foolish daughter. For 8 years, due to my pride and shame, I rarely contacted my family. I silently endured the bitterness at my in-laws' house just to prove I had made the right choice. The pain of betrayal wasn't just that Thomas had someone else. It was that he turned me into a puppet, a prop to play the role of the perfect husband in front of the world while secretly destroying my life. Every pill I swallowed, every insult from Eleanor I endured, it was all part of their plan of extortion and deception. I wondered if Thomas ever truly loved me for even a second, or if from day one, he only looked at my family's wealth as a stepping stone. And when he saw me leave home empty-handed, he shifted gears and sought another way out. Thomas's betrayal was a fatal stab that severed my final emotional tie to that house. I was no longer the weak, submissive Lauren who just bowed her head and took the abuse. The fire of vengeance was smoldering within me, but it wasn't a blind rage that would lead to stupid mistakes. I needed a plan, a crushing counterattack so those monsters would know that a sterling daughter might sacrifice everything for love, but when betrayed, she becomes unyielding iron. I pulled out my phone, my shaking fingers scrolling to a contact I hadn't called in a long time. It was Dr. Megan, my childhood best friend, now a prominent OBGYN, and the only person I could trust right now. Megan. It's me, Lauren. I need your help. A massive favor. My voice was hoarse but resolute. On the other end, Megan was silent for a moment before sighing heavily. Perhaps she had always anticipated this day would come. We agreed to meet at a discreet location, where I would outline the first steps of my journey to reclaim my dignity and my life. The price of betrayal would be exorbitant, and I would make sure Thomas, Eleanor, and Tara paid every single cent. I stood up, adjusted my coat, and looked at my reflection in the window. My eyes no longer held the sorrow of a barren wife. They blazed with an iron will. I would turn this pain into power, to bloom brilliantly right in the middle of the hellscape they created. I walked into Megan's private clinic as the afternoon sun cast long shadows down the sterile-smelling hallways. Megan looked at me, unable to hide the heartbreak in her eyes, seeing how frail her friend had become after years of enduring abuse. I placed the 2 pale pink pills and the forged urology report on her desk. My hands still trembled slightly, but my gaze had lost its despair. Megan picked up the pill after hearing my entire story, then slammed her fist onto her desk. The sharp crack echoed loudly. That son of a bitch! He didn't just cheat on you, he chemically sterilized you. Lauren, how can a monster like that exist behind such a nice guy mask? Megan exclaimed in absolute fury. Tears welled up again, but this time out of gratitude for my best friend's validation. I gripped Megan's hand, my voice raspy but firm. I told her I was done crying. I wanted them to taste the exact feeling of being manipulated and stripped of everything, just as they did to me for 8 years. We sat together in her office. Megan helped me analyze my next moves with the clinical precision of a medical professional. Megan said the most effective way to give them a taste of their own medicine was to strike at their biggest weakness. Eleanor and Thomas's desperate hunger for a legitimate heir to cement their status. A silent plan was forged. I wouldn't rush into a divorce or cause a scene only to walk away empty-handed. I needed time to claw back what was mine from my assets to my trampled dignity. Megan promised to help me prepare necessary medical files, picture-perfect ultrasound results to lead those arrogant conspirators by the nose. I returned home after dark. The house was quiet, but inside me, a tidal wave was churning. I saw Thomas attentively walking Leo around the front yard. A scene that used to warm my heart now made me physically nauseous from the extreme hypocrisy. I took a deep breath, adjusting my facial expression before walking through the heavy front door. I smiled, greeting Eleanor as she sat on the expensive leather sofa filing her nails. Her eyes were sharp as ever, but I was no longer afraid. You're finally back? Why did you take so long at the market? Dinner isn't cooked, and you're just wandering around aimlessly. Eleanor's grating voice rang out. I replied softly, lacing my words with hidden meaning. I had some crucial business to handle, Mom. Securing the future of this household. I walked into my bedroom. gathering the broken shards of my soul to prepare for the greatest performance of my life. Every step I took, every word I spoke from now on had to be mathematically calculated. I was going to war against cunning foxes wearing the skin of family. The next morning, I initiated phase 1 with a highly convincing act of morning sickness. I purposely woke up later than usual, and the second I stepped into the kitchen, I covered my mouth and sprinted to the downstairs half-bath to dry heave. Eleanor was sipping her morning coffee. She slowly put her mug down, her scrutinizing eyes glued to my back. I knew she was suspicious. For 8 years, the word pregnancy was the most taboo, unattainable luxury in this house. I leaned exhaustedly against the wall, my face genuinely pale from a sleepless night, which accidentally provided incredible authenticity. Thomas came down the stairs. Seeing his wife in distress, he rushed over in a panic, but in his eyes, I saw absolute, unadulterated horror rather than concern. He knew he had been feeding me birth control every single night. The idea that I had pregnancy symptoms was a massive shock to him. I looked at him, giving him a weak smile, and said, "I've been feeling so strange lately, Tom. Maybe I need to go see a doctor." A few days later, under Megan's brilliant arrangement, I brought home an ultrasound printout boldly stating, "Twin gestation." When I handed the paper to Eleanor, her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped her teacup. Her face morphed from shock to sheer, ecstatic joy. She hastily threw on her reading glasses to peer closely at the blurry black and white images. "Oh my God, twins? It's really twins? The heavens have eyes. The barren tree has finally borne fruit," she cried out, her voice trembling with emotion, completely forgetting the venomous insults she had hurled at me for almost a decade. Thomas stood next to her, all the color draining from his face. He looked at the ultrasound, then at me, his lips twitching, unable to form a word. I knew he was in a state of sheer panic. He was undoubtedly wondering how his birth control failed, but in front of his mother and wife, he was forced to play the role of the happiest husband on earth. From that day on, Eleanor's attitude did a complete 180. She didn't let me lift a finger around the house, and even personally cooked the most nutritious organic meals for me. She looked at me with an obnoxiously fake affection, constantly reminding me to rest so the 2 little golden nuggets would be safe. I soaked up her care as overdue compensation, but internally, I laughed at the shallow vanity of it all. They didn't value me as a human. They valued my uterus because it was supposedly carrying the legitimate heirs to their suburban kingdom. Thomas was different. He became quiet and constantly shot me suspicious glances. I knew he was secretly trying to figure out why I was pregnant. I had already flushed the real birth control pills. At every meal, I gracefully put food on Leo's plate, acting like the most benevolent foster mother, which immensely pleased Eleanor while simultaneously twisting the knife of guilt deeper into Thomas. While Eleanor and Thomas were wrapped up in the fake joy of my twins, someone else was sitting on pins and needles, Tara. Ever since she heard I was pregnant, her status in the house plummeted. She was no longer Eleanor's favorite, because Leo was no longer the sole hope. I noticed Tara frequently hiding behind the kitchen door, glaring at me with eyes full of jealousy and sheer terror. She understood that if I actually birthed Thomas's children, she and her son would forever remain parasites, liable to be tossed out onto the street at any moment. My sharpened intuition caught onto the malicious plots brewing in her head. Tara stopped being diligent. She dropped plates. Sometimes I caught her whispering aggressively to Thomas in the dark. One afternoon, while I was resting on the patio recliner, Tara quietly brought out a glass of fresh orange juice. Her smile was incredibly forced. "Lauren, have some juice. Eleanor told me to squeeze it for you." Her tone was submissive, but her eyes kept darting around defensively. I took the glass but didn't drink it. I saw her hands shaking slightly. I remembered Megan's warning that cornered animals do stupid things. I smiled, thanked her, put the glass on the table, and faked a phone call to go inside. Peeking through the blinds, I saw Tara staring anxiously at the glass. When she saw me returning, she quickly snatched it up and rushed to the sink to dump it. The war was heating up, and Tara was the first pawn I needed to neutralize. Tara's panic reached its zenith when Eleanor started discussing with Thomas how to remodel the massive master suite into a nursery for the twins. Every word Eleanor spoke was a dagger in Tara's heart, a woman who delusionally thought she was securing her place as the lady of the house. I stood in the shadows, watching the 3 of them. Each had their own agenda, their own dark plot. It was a sickening parody of a family. Thomas continued playing the model husband, but he tossed and turned every night. He was terrified his secret about Leo would be exposed if I actually had my own kids. I smiled silently in the dark. My composure was their biggest nightmare. I would let them destroy each other, exposing their most vile traits. I just had to wait for the perfect moment to deliver the final blow. The coming days wouldn't be peaceful, but I was ready, because behind me stood Megan, and the unyielding pride of a sterling daughter who refused to bow to evil. Ever since the twin ultrasound appeared, this cold house became unusually chaotic. Eleanor paced back and forth, constantly mumbling about picking an auspicious date to host a lavish Thanksgiving dinner to brag to the HOA. I sat in my room, listening to her slippers shuffling in the hallway, feeling a deep sense of cynicism. For 8 years, I bled for this family. Yet to her, my only worth was acting as an incubator. I knew it was time to use this fake leverage to clear out the obstacles in my path. I slowly walked down the stairs, dramatically holding my lower back. I let my eyes slide past Tara, who was standing numbly by the kitchen island. I approached Eleanor, lowering my voice with feigned concern. "Mom, I haven't been feeling well lately. The doctor said I need absolute bed rest and zero noise." I glanced out the window at Leo, who was screaming and running in the yard, and sighed heavily. Kids are so hyper. Sometimes he startles me so badly. I'm worried it might affect the twins during this crucial first trimester. Eleanor's face drained of color immediately. To her, nothing mattered more than the 2 babies I was supposedly carrying. She turned to look at Tara and Leo, her eyes flashing with sudden irritation. Her previous adoration for Leo was instantly overridden by her priority for the legitimate bloodline. I added the final nail in the coffin. Maybe it's best if Tara and Leo move to an apartment for a while? It gives Leo space to run. And it gives me the peace I need to protect my high-risk pregnancy. Tara heard my suggestion. Her face turned stormy dark. Her hands gripped the dish rag so tightly her knuckles turned white. She glared at me, shooting daggers, but in front of Eleanor, she didn't dare say a word. Thomas walked in from the garage, freezing when he heard the conversation. His face twisted in agonizing conflict. He looked at his son, looked at his mistress, and then looked at my flat stomach. He was burning alive from the inside. I smiled sweetly at him. "You agree, don't you, honey? For the future of our babies, we can't take any risks." Thomas could only nod mechanically. He had absolutely no reason to object without ripping off his perfect husband mask. Ultimately, under Eleanor's relentless pressure, Tara and Leo were forced to pack their bags and move to a cheap motel that very afternoon. Watching Tara drag her duffel bags, clutching Leo's hand, I felt zero sympathy. I knew it seemed cruel, but my cruelty was nothing compared to the psychological torture they subjected me to for 8 years. When the front door clicked shut, the house felt instantly lighter. But it was merely the calm before a much more devastating storm. Tara's departure didn't bring Thomas peace. On the contrary, he became increasingly sullen and randomly irritable. He started staying out late, coming home reeking of scotch, actively avoiding my gaze. I knew he and Tara were meeting secretly. In the shadows of those illicit rendezvous, the darkest schemes were being hatched. A woman like Tara, who had briefly tasted the luxury of Thomas's suburban wealth, wasn't going to accept going back to a squalid motel. I started paying close attention to Thomas's hushed phone calls on the patio. His face would contort with stress, sometimes exhibiting a terrifying ruthlessness. One night, I pretended to be dead asleep, but my ears strained to catch every sound. Thomas was at his desk, the dim lamp casting a sinister shadow across his face. He was frantically shuffling papers. I heard him sigh, then whisper viciously into his phone. "If she actually gives birth, we lose everything. My mother will never let you and Leo back in." Whoever was on the other end, Tara, surely was inciting him, because his voice grew ice-cold and sociopathic. "We have to make the miscarriage look completely natural. No one can suspect a thing, especially her doctor friend." My heart stopped. The man I once called my husband, who had sworn vows to me, was now actively plotting to murder the non-existent children in my womb. Their depravity exceeded my wildest nightmares. They didn't just want to deceive me, they wanted to physically destroy me again. Thomas changed his tactics. He stopped avoiding me and became obsessively attentive. He bought me fruit, pastries, everything. But behind every caring gesture, I saw his hands trembling and the erratic panic in the eyes of a man harboring murderous intent. He suggested I take a special organic herbal detox broth that he said he got from a holistic specialist to strengthen the babies. I accepted it all with a smile, but my guard was at maximum. I secretly saved samples of every bowl of soup, every meal, sending them to Megan for testing. I knew the war had entered its lethal phase. My life, and my last shred of dignity, hung by a thread. But their desperation proved my plan was working perfectly. It was driving them to absolute madness. I looked at Thomas, a man desperately trying to play the responsible father-to-be, and felt nauseated by the sheer depravity of human nature. His sweet words were now the hiss of a coiled viper. That afternoon, a massive thunderstorm rolled over the city, turning the sky an oppressive gray. Thomas came home early, carrying a bag of expensive wellness powders and custom tea blends, claiming he was making me a holistic prenatal infusion. He spent hours tinkering in the kitchen, occasionally glancing up at the living room where I was watching TV. The strong, earthy aroma of the herbal steep filled the house. To me, it smelled like pure poison. Eleanor came down the stairs. Seeing her son cooking so diligently, she was immensely pleased. She praised Thomas for being a loving husband. Right at that moment, the doorbell rang. Surprisingly, it was Tara. She stood there soaking wet, pale-faced, claiming Leo had a dangerously high fever at the motel, and she needed Thomas's help to take him to the ER. Eleanor was visibly annoyed by the intrusion, but hearing her grandson was sick, she didn't throw Tara out. Tara walked in, her eyes immediately locking onto the steaming bowl of broth on the kitchen island. She shot Thomas a heavily loaded wink. I chuckled internally. So this was the golden hour they chose to strike, while the house was in chaos over Leo. Thomas carefully poured the broth into a bowl and brought it to me, his voice eerily soothing. "Drink this while it's hot, Lauren. It'll help you sleep better." I took the bowl. The steam hit my face, but Thomas's hands were freezing cold and shaking. I looked deep into his eyes, a piercing stare that forced him to look away. I didn't drink it. I placed the bowl on the coffee table and turned to Tara, who was shifting nervously. "Tara, you must be exhausted from the rain and worrying about Leo. You look terrible. Here, I insist you drink this broth first to get your strength up to take care of the boy." Thomas jumped like he'd been electrocuted. He frantically waved his hands. "No, that's prenatal medicine. It's not good for normal people to drink." I smiled a cryptic smile. "Don't be silly, Tom. It's just an organic wellness tea. Anyone can drink it. Besides, Tara is basically family. Why are you discriminating against her?" Thomas's stuttering panic and Tara's deer-in-headlights expression confirmed my suspicions beyond a shadow of a doubt. I stood up, picked up the bowl, and walked it right up to Tara's mouth. My tone was ironclad yet dripping with fake concern, practically forcing her to take it. Eleanor chimed in. "Just drink it to make Lauren happy, Tara. My daughter-in-law is being generous. Don't refuse." Tara looked at Thomas, begging for him to save her. But Thomas was rooted to the spot, sweating profusely. He couldn't stop her without admitting the broth contained an abortifacient. Under the intense pressure from me and Eleanor, Tara was forced to take the bowl and gulp down the hot liquid, her eyes wide with terror. Watching her swallow the poison they had prepared for me, I knew the trap had snapped shut flawlessly. The living room suddenly felt thick, the air suffocating. After downing the broth, Tara's face went from pale to a sickly purple. Her hands shook as she set the empty bowl down, unable to meet my eyes. I maintained my gentle smile, but inside, I was observing with cold, ruthless precision. 10 minutes later, while Eleanor was still asking about Leo's symptoms, Tara suddenly collapsed onto the sofa, clutching her stomach. A low groan escaped her clenched teeth. Thomas reacted violently. He lunged toward Tara, absolute panic written across his face. He reached out to catch her, then froze, terrified of his mother's watchful eyes. Seeing the blood drain from his face, I felt a weight lift, replaced by disgust for the fake loyalty he was trying to uphold. Tara was in agonizing pain, sweating buckets. The severe cramps made it impossible for her to stand. She mumbled incoherently. Eleanor panicked and yelled at Thomas to take her to the hospital immediately. I stood there feigning shock, but effectively blocked Thomas's attempt to cover it up. "Should I call 911? Tom, you're too frantic to drive safely. And wow, that broth you made was supposed to be nutritious." Why did Tara react so horribly to it? Thomas looked at me with pure hatred, swimming in an ocean of fear. He knew I knew, or at least suspected. He frantically waved off the 911 idea, scooped Tara up in his arms, and sprinted to his car, leaving Eleanor standing in bewildered shock. As the SUV peeled out of the driveway, I turned to Eleanor, sighed dramatically, and said, "Maybe Tara has a weak stomach. Or maybe she just brings bad karma into our home." Eleanor nodded blankly, her mind a mess over her sick grandson and his mother collapsing in her living room. I went to my bedroom, locked the door, and felt bile rise in my throat. That bowl of soup. If I hadn't been vigilant, I would be the one writhing in agony, facing the chemical termination of a pregnancy, even a fake one. Thomas's depravity knew no bounds. He was willing to murder his own flesh and blood, so he thought, just to protect his assets and his delusional ego. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the sheets. There was no turning back. Those who sow the wind will reap the whirlwind. After the poisoned soup incident, an eerie silence fell over the house. Thomas left early and came home late, practically avoiding eye contact with me. I heard Tara was hospitalized for a few days due to severe food poisoning. I knew it was time to move on my assets before it was too late. For 8 years, blindly trusting my husband, I had let him handle all our joint finances and savings accounts. Whenever he was out, I began secretly auditing the documents in his locked home office, my heart racing. My desire for justice kept my hands steady. Under a false bottom in a locked drawer, I found a stack of bank statements. To my horror, massive chunks of our joint savings had been siphoned off over the last few months. Not only that, but I found escrow documents for investment properties and physical gold certificates all held solely under Eleanor's name. He had calculated this perfectly. He was systematically hiding marital assets so that when the inevitable divorce came, I would walk away destitute. I sat on the hardwood floor. No tears came. My heart was too calloused from the endless shocks. This was the man who had sworn vows to me, who promised to care for me forever, even if I was barren. To him, I was just an ATM, an unpaid maid, and a human shield for his dark secrets. Every number on those statements was a stab wound, mocking my years of blind devotion. I immediately called Megan and asked her to find the most ruthless, discreet divorce attorney in the city. Megan was heartbroken. She told me to stay frosty and leave no vulnerabilities, because Thomas was incredibly sly. I photographed every document, copied bank routing numbers, and tracked his emails with real estate brokers. To drag these parasites into the light, I couldn't use emotion. I needed steel-clad financial evidence. My composure was my deadliest weapon. I continued playing the sweet wife, caring for Eleanor. But behind that, care was an invoice being drawn up, demanding payback with heavy interest. The climax arrived unexpectedly. Leo's condition worsened at the motel. He became lethargic and started having febrile seizures, sending Eleanor into a hysterical panic. She forced Thomas to rush him to the best pediatric hospital in the city. I went with them not out of pity for the child who didn't share my blood, but because I knew this was the golden opportunity to rip the final mask off. At the hospital, while waiting for the blood work, Thomas sat slumped in the hallway, looking haggard. I approached him, pretending to comfort him. "Kids get sick, Tom. Try not to worry, but you look terrible. You really need to get your own health checked." He just shook his head. He had no idea the massive trap waiting for him. When the pediatrician called the family in, I confidently stepped into the room alongside Thomas. The doctor held a chart, looking grim. He asked about family medical history to pinpoint the cause of the persistent fever. To ensure accuracy, the doctor suggested a deep genetic panel, because some of the child's markers didn't align with the medical history Thomas had provided earlier. At that exact moment, I pulled a piece of paper from my designer purse. It was a real, verified medical file from years ago that Megan had pulled from the hospital archives regarding Thomas's actual physical exams. I handed it to the doctor, my voice laced with innocent concern. "Would this help, doctor?" "It's my husband's reproductive health record." The doctor skimmed the paper, then looked at Thomas in profound confusion. The older physician adjusted his glasses, his voice professional but devastating. "Mr. Thomas, if these are indeed your records, I must confirm that you suffer from congenital azoospermia. Your chance of naturally fathering a child is literally 0. Thomas died on the spot. The color vanished from his face, turning it a ghostly gray. His lips trembled, unable to form a sound. Eleanor, standing nearby, panicked and asked the doctor repeatedly if there was a mix-up. I watched Thomas. I watched the absolute annihilation of his soul in his eyes. The fortress of lies he had spent years building had just collapsed, crushing him underneath. The naked truth was laid bare in the cold hospital hallway. If Thomas couldn't have children, then whose child was the boy lying in that hospital bed? The hospital monitors beeped steadily, but inside me, the world had shattered and reformed. The real sterility report sat in my purse like a loaded gun. But a bigger question clawed at my mind. If Thomas was sterile, who was Leo's real father? Had Tara played Thomas? Or did Thomas know and accept it just to create the perfect illusion to fool his mother and the world? I looked at Megan, who had arrived to support me. She gave a subtle nod. Everything was ready for a DNA test. Taking advantage of Thomas hovering over Leo in the ICU and Eleanor praying in the hospital chapel, I had secretly swiped a few strands of Leo's hair and matched it with Thomas's hair I had collected from his comb at home. Megan expedited the DNA test. The wait felt like a century. I continued my act, bringing soup to the hospital, but seeing Thomas's fake, anxious face made me want to vomit. Finally, the results arrived. I held the envelope from Megan, my hands shaking. Probability of paternity, 0%. It was hilarious and utterly repulsive. Tara, the woman Thomas protected and funded, was the ultimate con artist. She had gotten knocked up by some guy back in her hometown and brought the kid here to trick Thomas into being the ultimate ATM. And Thomas, so desperate for an heir and to cement his ego, was either blinded by arrogance or willingly led by the nose. It was a cosmic slap to the face of a sociopath. Sitting in a quiet cafe, watching the city traffic, I pitied myself for wasting 8 years. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't break. I held the death card. It was time to end the circus. That afternoon, I walked into the hospital a completely different woman. No longer the submissive victim, but an executioner holding the truth. I saw Thomas and Tara arguing fiercely at the end of a secluded corridor. Thomas looked exhausted. Tara was sobbing hysterically. I walked toward them, my stilettos clicking sharply against the linoleum. At the sight of me, they froze. Thomas looked terrified. Tara tried to scurry into the patient room, but my icy voice stopped her. I pulled out the DNA test and the real sterility report, slamming them onto the waiting room table, staring directly into Thomas's eyes. I didn't say a word. I just watched his reaction as the numbers destroyed his entire reality. Thomas read it. He turned purple. His hands shook violently. He looked at Tara with homicidal rage and pure shock. Tara slumped against the wall, sobbing hysterically, babbling useless pleas. The truth that Thomas was sterile and the boy was a bastard obliterated his armor. He stuttered, trying to explain, trying to apologize. I held up my hand, silencing him. His words were just dirt in my wounds. In total despair, Thomas broke down, trying to grab my arm to stop me, pleading desperately for a way out. He blamed his mother's pressure, claiming he loved me so much he had to do it to keep me. Hearing that made me ice cold. Absolute contempt for the coward groveling at my feet. I looked at Tara, who was begging me not to tell Eleanor because the kid was innocent. I stayed silent. A long, suffocating silence. I wasn't in pain anymore. I felt a bizarre, liberating peace knowing the true faces of these demons. I turned and walked away, leaving their wails and pathetic apologies behind. This was just the appetizer. The main course of consequences was coming. After the hospital confrontation, I thought Thomas would repent, or at least quietly surrender. I severely underestimated the malice of a cornered rat. Instead of remorse, Thomas launched a highly sophisticated smear campaign to salvage his reputation and the assets he had hidden. He started spreading rumors around the homeowners association, telling our wealthy neighbors and his relatives that I was a whore, that my twin pregnancy was real, but the babies belonged to an affair partner. To legitimize it, he hired a private investigator to stage photos of me walking into a hotel with a strange man, doctoring the images as ironclad proof. The vicious rumors spread like wildfire through our upscale suburb. The side eyes I used to get for being childless turned into glares of disgust. Eleanor, upon hearing her son's whispers and seeing the fake photos, unleashed a torrent of abuse, calling me a streetwalker who disgraced their family name. She physically threw my belongings out the front door into the pouring rain, without a shred of pity for the woman she thought was carrying her grandchildren. I stood in the driveway, looking at the McMansion I had lived in for 8 years, realizing how alien and terrifying it was. Thomas stood on the balcony, looking down at me with a triumphant, venomous smirk. He truly believed that by destroying my reputation, he got to play the tragic, cuckolded husband and keep all the money. He forgot one crucial detail. I was no longer the naive Lauren. Every dirty trick he pulled only made the evidence in my arsenal more lethal. I quietly packed my few wet bags and left. No screaming, no tears. I went to Megan's apartment, my only sanctuary, to prepare the final strike. Sitting in her living room, I reviewed the audio recordings, the financial traces, the medical files. Every insult, every act of degradation fueled my resolve. To defeat a monster wearing the mask of an American dream husband, I had to use the law and the brutal truth to publicly execute his reputation. Sunday morning, the suburban air was humid and suffocating, threatening a severe thunderstorm. I stood before the mirror in Megan's guest room, smoothing out my tailored navy blue blazer. Today was the neighborhood HOA board meeting at the country club, the exact venue Thomas had chosen to publicly solidify his narrative of my infidelity and justify my eviction. I took a deep breath. Megan squeezed my hand. She had helped me load the nuclear codes onto a tiny USB drive in my pocket. We walked into the country club banquet hall. The whispers about the cheating wife were buzzing like a hive of hornets. When I walked in, the room went dead silent, then erupted into aggressive murmurs. Thomas was in the front row, looking perfectly disheveled and tragically heartbroken. Eleanor was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, whining about their family's tragedy. Seeing me, Thomas jumped up, his voice cracking with fake emotion. "How dare you show your face here after what you did to us?" I didn't flinch. I gave a cold, dry smile and walked straight up to the podium. "I request the HOA president give me 5 minutes to clear the air before this neighborhood casts its final stone." To the absolute shock of everyone, I plugged the USB drive into the projector laptop. I hit play on the audio recording of Thomas and Eleanor under the oak tree, discussing swapping my pills and legalizing his bastard. The crystal-clear audio of the perfect husband's demonic plot echoed through the banquet hall. The judgmental faces in the crowd turned to stone. Before they could recover, I flashed the DNA results on the massive projector screen, side by side with Thomas's clinical diagnosis of congenital sterility. The hall exploded. A riot of gasps and shouts. The glares of disgust violently shifted from me to Thomas and Eleanor, who were frozen in their seats. Thomas lunged for the laptop, but several men from the neighborhood physically restrained him. I stared him down, my voice ringing out like a gavel. "This is the true face of your neighborhood's perfect husband." I then displayed the unedited metadata of the staged hotel photos, proving he hired an actor to frame me. The naked truth was too much. Eleanor fainted dead away onto the carpet. Thomas slumped over a table, shaking not from remorse, but from the catastrophic, public humiliation. I stepped down from the podium and walked past him without a single glance. My years of silence had been cashed in for total annihilation. I walked out of the country club amidst the chaotic shouts of the neighbors. But this time, they were voices of shock, pity, and awe for a woman who had fought back. Just as I stepped out of the club's double doors, a convoy of 3 sleek, black Cadillac Escalades pulled up right in front of me. To the absolute astonishment of the wealthy suburbanites, a distinguished, silver-haired man in a bespoke suit stepped out of the center SUV. It was my father, Richard Sterling. Seeing him, my iron facade cracked. I choked out a sob, "Dad," and threw myself into his arms. My father patted my back, his voice booming with authority. "No one will ever bully my daughter again." Eleanor, who had just been revived and dragged outside by Thomas, saw the fleet of cars. She stuttered, unable to form words. She had never known that the daughter-in-law she treated like a stray dog was actually the heiress to one of the most prominent real estate empires on the East Coast. My father didn't even look at Thomas. He gestured to his private security detail to go to the house and retrieve the rest of my belongings. Thomas looked like a ghost. He tried to step forward to apologize, to beg for mercy, but the massive men in black suits easily shoved him back. The neighbors who had previously sneered at me now scrambled to act polite, realizing my actual pedigree. I just smiled tightly. I knew the nature of people. When you're up, they swarm. When you're down, only true friends stay. My father looked at the suburb where I wasted 8 years with deep sorrow. He led me into the plush leather of the Escalade. As the SUV rolled away, leaving Thomas standing pathetic and alone in the driveway, I felt as light as a feather. I leaned on my father's shoulder, absorbing the family warmth I had stubbornly rejected for a fake illusion of love. He told me he had kept tabs on me for 8 years, just waiting for the day I woke up and came home. No, I told you so. Just open arms. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall. I would never have to fight alone again. Back at the Sterling estate, I took a few days to decompress. But the war wasn't over until the legal system had its say. Backed by my father's army of elite corporate lawyers, I filed for divorce and sued for financial fraud. The divorce petition was filed alongside mountains of evidence of marital fraud, emotional abuse, and extreme financial embezzlement. Thomas sent thousands of texts begging for forgiveness, claiming Tara tricked him and he still loved me. I felt nothing but nausea. I ignored them all, letting the lawyers speak for me. Eleanor repeatedly called my father, crying that she was just an ignorant old woman, begging him to drop the lawsuits. My father hung up on her and told his legal team to proceed to trial. The day of the hearing arrived. When cornered in court, Thomas still desperately claimed the real estate and gold in Eleanor's name were bought with her life savings. But when Eleanor was put on the stand, the pressure broke her. Instead of protecting her son, the terrified older woman wept on the stand, confessing that Thomas had transferred all the marital funds to her over the last 6 years to hide them from me. She sobbed that she didn't want to go to federal prison for a lie. Thomas was obliterated. The judge ordered the immediate liquidation and return of all hidden assets, with punitive damages awarded to me. Thomas's firm fired him the moment the scandal hit the local news. The worst blow, however, wasn't financial. It was the public legal confirmation that he was sterile, and Tara's son was a fraud. Tara had been exposed. Her actual husband, back in her rural hometown, found out she was playing mistress to a rich man. He filed for custody, drove up, and took Leo away. Tara was left stranded in the city with no money, no son, and no sugar daddy. Thomas lost his wife, his wealth, his reputation, his job, and his heir. I watched him being escorted out of the courthouse. His hair had gone gray in a matter of weeks. I felt no joy, only a profound pity for a life destroyed by unchecked greed and ego. 2 years flew by. This morning, the New York sky was brilliant blue. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. I sat in the executive chair of the Sterling Corporation's new philanthropic division, reviewing expansion plans. I was no longer the trapped suburban housewife. I had taken control of my destiny. My father often stopped by my office in the afternoons. He'd drop off a coffee, look at me with immense pride, and tell me that seeing my genuine smile return was his greatest achievement. Megan remained my rock. On weekends, we volunteered at women's shelters. Drawing from my own nightmare, I founded a legal and psychological aid foundation for women facing marital abuse and financial coercion. I named it the Oak Tree Initiative. I wanted women to know that no matter how dark the sky gets, you can survive. As for Thomas and Eleanor, I occasionally heard rumors. Thomas was working grueling shifts as a mechanic at a sketchy auto shop in Queens, drowning in debt, too ashamed to look his old peers in the eye. Eleanor's health was failing in a tiny, run-down apartment. The isolation was her ultimate punishment. I felt entirely indifferent. They sowed the wind and reaped the whirlwind. Standing on the penthouse balcony, looking out over the glittering Manhattan skyline, I closed the mental diary of my past. I was no longer the weak, desperate Lauren. I was resilient, confident, and proud. Life is fair. It strips you of illusions to hand you the truth, as long as you know your worth. I smiled at my reflection in the glass, ready for the brightest chapter of my life. The flower had survived the storm,